Monday night, and you are here at Litvak Leadership Live. Got a great show this evening. Got a friend, a mentor, a coach, someone that has some incredible insight. Dr. Jeff Williamson is with us this evening. We're going to be talking about where your greatness flourishes. I'm going to bring him out in just a minute. But before I do that, let me ask you, are you liking, following, commenting, and sharing on occasion everything that has to do with Litvak leadership? Whether it's YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, you need to check out all of the social media. On YouTube, I have been running the 93 Days of Spring pop-up videos on other social media, but every single day, a short or a very short video has been appearing on YouTube that I know will encourage and help you. Also, signed copies of Proverbs for Leadership are available at proverbsforleadership.com. If you are not familiar with my book, it's Proverbs for Leadership. You must understand yourself and improve if you desire leadership that produces success in others. I like to say it's all about you and it's not about you at all. So read the book, check it out, ask questions. And then finally, in July, I am going to be releasing Proverbs for Leadership, the video masterclass. I've been recording videos based on the book and behind the scenes stories that I have not included in the book to really bring the lessons to the forefront for you so you can understand yourself and improve on your leadership journey. So welcome again to Litvak Leadership Live. Without any further ado, let me bring out the founder and CEO of Converge Group, Dr. Jeff Williamson. Hello, Jeff.
Hey,
how are you?
I'm good. I'm glad to be here, Sean. Thanks for having me. It's good to catch up with you a little bit.
I am so excited to have you here. This is almost like the frosting on the cake when I've talked to people, and this is for the audience, about my coach that I engaged with for a period of time. That was Dr. Jeff. So to have him here is just a great honor to talk with him about some of the things probably that we talked about, other things that we haven't talked about, and to pick his brain over this. Dr. Jeff listened to me talk about this book and
it was
what
okay.
I was going to do with it and where it was going. There during my heart surgery, that was very unexpected. So it was a good time. If you are looking for a coach, I would highly endorse Dr. Jeff Williamson, at least for you to talk to him. I will tell you, just like I told you, Jeff, you were the seventh coach that I had interviewed. And you've got to find who you click with. And I'm not saying everyone will click with you, but I know there are some people that will, so they should check you out.
Thank you.
You can find Dr. Jeff at, here we go, Jeff at convergegroup.io. So Jeff, why don't you tell us briefly a little bit about Converge Group before we hop into our topic?
Sure, I'd love to. Thanks for the opportunity. In short, Converge Group is really about people development. We do that through executive coaching. We do that through training with companies, nonprofits, corporate, etc. And so it's really about helping people grow. And of course, we're going to talk about strengths, and that's at the heart of that as well. So we have different ways that we help people to maximize who they are, their abilities, their skills, and walk with them through that process.
That's great. That's great. So let's hop into our topic tonight. We're at episode 192, where your greatness flourishes. So I'm going to throw you a little bit of a curveball to start. I know you're a faith man. I'm a faith man. And I want to ask you a question.
Sure.
Is it possible, in your opinion, for people to really, truly flourish in their God-given, God-spoken callings in their life and what people put their hand to if
Mhm.
they don't have a faith foundation that they engage with? Is it possible to reach that pinnacle?
Yeah. Well, boy, you just went right in off the top.
I went right
No,
in and put you
no,
on the
no softballs right off the top.
spot. No
You know,
softballs at all.
one of the things, some of the things that I talk about when I train groups and individuals and work with strengths is we talk about those God-given hardwired DNA characteristics, gifts, talents, and strengths that they have. And I think a lot of times, even if someone isn't a person of faith, they have those gifts, they have those beautiful, unique things about them, and they may just not recognize from where those came, right?
Mhm.
And so if they don't have a sense of faith, I think they may recognize the gifts they have, the strengths they have, but it to me it's incomplete if they think it just came from them, right? Our strengths are given to us to share with other people. They're not for
Yeah.
us. I'll often say our strengths and our talents, they're not for us. And so to try to truly answer your question, I think it's somewhat incomplete, but can still be terrific because hundreds of people I've worked with over the years, some are and some are not people of faith, but I still hear back repeatedly that like, man, this was just like I cracked the code on my team. I literally had a former
Yeah.
client tell me that today. One of his employees, we looked at their strengths and it was like, man, it was like I had the scouting report. Not in a bad way. It was like, I think I can crack the code and figure out how to be a better supervisor for that person. So I think someone's going to miss something if they don't have that faith foundation, but still seeing a lot of great things come out of a focus on strengths and getting better that way.
So when you look at people's talents, when they look at their own talents, it's funny when you said
Mhm.
talents, I immediately thought of Jesus' parable where
Mhm.
the master that had given talents to his team. I think they were slaves back then, and
Probably. Yeah.
one if I recall correctly, one buried
Mhm.
one, the
Mhm.
talents.
Mhm.
One
Mhm.
invested it and made a bunch of money, and
Mhm.
one, I don't know, they made some money, but not as
Mhm.
much as the one that
Yeah.
invested it.
Yeah.
So in that instance, talents was talking specifically about money, but you say that our
Mhm.
talents are not for ourselves, they are
Mhm.
for others.
Mhm.
Looking at that parable,
Mhm.
it just struck me, if people keep their
Mhm.
talents to themselves, they're not helping
Mhm.
others.
Mhm.
How should people engage their talents and
Mhm.
give them to others without
Mhm.
overwhelming them?
Yeah. Well, of course, we start with the identification of what those talents are. If it's the assessment or someone who knows us well can help us identify some of the best things about us if they don't do the assessment. But I think where I see the parable of the talents have some parallels is that if I don't know anything about my talents, if I don't focus, if I don't think upon, reflect upon my talents and how I use them to serve others, I'm kind of like that one that dug a hole in the ground and buried the one talent because they had a harsh master, as the
Yeah.
scripture says. Someone who studies and develops the strengths that they've been given and then uses them to serve other people, that's the part where it's not for us. To me, I see that being kind of like the one who made more profit, so to speak, profit in quotes, with the five talents they had been given because they developed them, they built them, they manifested them, and then, as we know, the story goes, they were blessed even more
Even more
because they
so.
had used them to their fullest extent. And I think when we use the gifts and the DNA hardwired kind of talents that we have, I think that's like the five talent that turned into 10 because we get exponential impact when we bless and benefit other people.
When you think about our multi-generational workforce, yes, this is a new kick of mine that I have gotten very focused on: boomers, Gen
Mm-hmm.
X,
Mm-hmm.
millennials, my
Mm-hmm.
son, Gen
Mm-hmm.
Z, my daughter, or really I should say millennials, my son and my daughter-in-law, and Gen Z, my daughter. And I look at each of those groups, both personally and professionally. There's a whole lot of strengths that we all bring to the table, yet there's a whole lot of weaknesses we bring. How do you think the multi-generational teams would be best to recognize those differences?
Sure. Well, one of the things that I love about the strengths assessment and the work we do with groups is that when we're doing, yes, thank you, Strengths Finder 2.0, great book, comes with the code. You're in business if you pick that up. But you know, when I work with a group or a department or a team, day one, besides having their assessment done ahead of time, I have them map their strengths on a quadrant and identify the clusters that are within that team. And then you have maybe someone who's 25, 28 working with me who's not. and they look at that and go, oh my gosh, we have these strengths that are different. We have these strengths that are similar. And then we start engaging and talking about, how do you show up with that strength set? How do you show up with that profile? And then we start having dialogue, and all of a sudden, nobody cares whether I'm 61 or they're 21 or 31. We really focus in on almost like that. It levels the playing field. I'll give you an example. Just this year, I did the strengths training for an entire women's basketball team at a local university. And I'm working with 19, 20, 21-year-olds, but we had a blast doing that same thing that a bunch of, boomers, Gen Xers and so forth do in a business setting. It's the same kind of activity. And they were just jazzed at 20, 30, 40, 50, wherever, to see the intersection of those. And that's been one of the most joyful, powerful things that I've seen year after year after year, is that it takes away some of those differences. While they're valuable, it levels things up, and then we can talk to each other from that context of strengths.
You know, when you and I were in the green room before we started catching up, one thing that I brought up, and yes, I'm taking 4 generations and dividing them into 2 groups, because I think it's appropriate for where we are in the business community, or in even associations, professional associations. You've got the Gen X and the boomers. The boomers are retiring more or less, although there's still a lot of boomers in leadership positions. Gen X is finally starting to strut into those leadership positions, and have been groomed for years and years and years and years and years.
And they're ready.
Waiting for those boomers to say, okay, we're done. And then you've got these hotshot millennials and Gen Z that have been educated, where everything moves so much faster. There's information like drinking from a fire hose, and there's friction between those 2 groups, let alone the 4. What is your advice as to how to get them to listen to each other? It'd be really easy for me as Gen X to say, how do I get my younger counterparts to listen to me? But frankly, I need to listen to them too.
That was right where I was going to go. It is, if listening's not a strength that they've developed or a gift that they have, it starts pretty well by us modeling that. And I think about, we were talking today at the office about, some new employees coming in and wanting to get them onboarded and identify those strengths for that same reason. So, I think that's part of my coach hat. When I put that on, I'm very intentional to say less and listen more as a coach. And I think when be it a younger generation, of course, most generations are younger than me at this point. When they see I ask questions and I listen and I give value and respect to their responses, I may say, I'm not sure I understand that. Could you tell me more about that?
Yeah.
The questions, the listening, the engaging, and inviting a continued conversation pretty quickly shifts that from, oh, you're an old guy and I'm 25, so we got nothing to talk about. And that's really been effective, at least in my circles.
I would tell you that my wife and I went to visit our daughter a couple weekends ago. And as we were sitting on a bench talking about a topic, all of a sudden, this tone came out of my daughter. And it was a very businessy tone. In the topic we were discussing, there's my 25-year-old daughter sounding very mature, very thoughtful, very logical, thinking ahead, asking questions, doing these things. And I'm thinking, who are you?
I like it, but where
I
does
like
this come
it,
from?
but wow.
Yeah.
This I looked at her a different way after that. And if someone has not had that experience with someone in Gen Z, where when they start speaking, you are, just shut up and listen. You are taken aback, not the people who are babbling, because you can babble in Gen X too. But when someone is really speaking, someone is really speaking and getting there and making a point, I think too often we miss that because we're more interested in hearing ourselves speak.
Right. And we've talked about this other times because my three children are in their mid-20s. My son's 31. My daughters are in their 20s. And so, that's very much something that when they get the questions, when they start to see what it looks like to be a good listener and to be an inquisitive listener, then they start reflecting that. And then you have a proud dad moment kind of going, wow, that was good. I like that. Nicely done. Right. So that goes back to modeling, trying to show them how they can engage people and learn from others, even when they don't think
I want to give you a plug on your book back there that for every millennial and Gen Z out there, and even the Gen X, if I've gotten a nickel for every person that has said to me, well, that's obvious, and I've held back saying, well, then why aren't you doing it? Okay. And your book, 168, respectfully, is so obvious. But when you and I first had the conversation about it, it was incredibly helpful to me. Tell people about 168.
Sure. Power 168 came out of a conversation several years back. I still teach as an adjunct in a doctoral program in leadership, and we were on a break at an intensive week-long course, and one of the learners came up to me and kind of looked both ways and said, I don't think I have time to do this program. It's first class, right out of the gate, spent months getting into the program. And now third day, I think, of a week-long class, I don't think I have time for this. And I listened and I said, well, don't take this wrong, but I think you do have time to do this program. But could we talk about this topic with the cohort, which is about 15 people? So it led to an extensive conversation in the classroom about, okay, hey, you're all busy people. You got things going on. You're working. You have families. You're doing all this. And then you start a 3-year doctoral program. Have you lost your mind? Right. So we laughed together. And then I said, look, let's look at it. Maybe, and I was playing the conversation. So maybe none of you have time. Maybe you're all here. You're crazy. You don't have time to do this. Let's just do some math. And so, without thinking ahead of time, I just wrote 168 because I thought 7 times 24 hours a day, that's 168 hours. We all get 168 hours, no matter who we are, from, you name it. Everybody gets the same amount of time every week, and you can play it out over the long haul. So we just had a good conversation about, we categorize where I said, look, tell me, let's do categories. Let's list where your time goes. You work, you sleep, you have family time, you know, community involvement, and you worship and all that. And so we did the math, and I let them identify what the right number of hours were for us to calculate. And when it was all done, and I like couple, 3 times said, is anything missing? Are you sure you like these numbers? Whatever. Well, we totaled them all up, and they had 20 to 25 waking hours they could not account for with all the things they said they were doing, and it was very important to them. And I said, 20 to 25 hours, 20 to 25 waking, and that was 8 hours of sleep every night. Okay.
Yeah.
We didn't cheat any of that. And so when we totaled it up, they just collectively laughed out loud. And I'm like, see, you do have time. It's just, you may have to cancel your Netflix, you know, subscription while you're in grad school. Because if that's where your time's going, you can spend that there. So, you know, a lot more nuances to it, but that's the general idea. Was I was just like, folks, it's what you do with it. It's how you prioritize it. It's how you choose to use it. And what's your desired outcome? You know, where do you want to go with that? So I'll stop there.
Well, and you know, that's the thing. What's your desired outcome? I remember when you and I first had the conversation of the Power 168, I made a spreadsheet, and I added it in, and because I think in spreadsheets, and I put it all together. And with our next session, I brought it to you, and you looked at it, and we started talking about it, and you said, "Are you not sleeping during the week?"
I forgot about that. I was sure I had some tart response.
I was so proud because I had completed the spreadsheet and said, yes, I can do everything I want to do. I have 10 extra hours yet, but I had not put sleep in there. And it made me realize that I was trying to do too much. So like you said, you know, you just gave the example of people that, yes, they underestimate, you know, they do have time for it, but then there's other people that, okay, they do need to prioritize. They need to pull back off some of the projects. And hey, that's a great idea, but it may not be a great idea for right now. What is the now idea? What is going to feed your other ideas? When we think about this, and this next spin on this comes from a conversation my wife and I had. When you look at the Gospels, you know, there's a reason that there's Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and they're all telling the same time period account for the most part. But they're, you know, for anyone who's dug deep into it, they're in different perspectives. Some would say, because I'm not going to start quoting why, Matthew was from a religious standpoint. Mark was from a position of power. Luke was for intellectuals. And John is the supernatural perspective on Jesus. You know, why? Not so much why, but even when you look at what God has put together, that the gospel story, the opportunity for eternal salvation, he put it together in a way to be presented to us in 4 different perspectives that it would meet and engage with, dare I say, everybody at one level or another. Is there anything that is comparable in business, or is there a way to look at that from a business perspective when you're working with people?
Well, one of the things that came to mind as we were talking about that is that, you know, when you look at those 4 different gospels, you're looking, as you said, you're looking at the story of that time through different contexts, through different perspectives. And to me, that the context is so key there, because you know, when I work with companies, when we're talking through challenges or things they may be facing, one, you know this, Sean, but one size does not fit all. So I have a basic approach that you're aware of because we work together, but I don't think one thing works for everybody. So sometimes it's like just like the four gospels, there are different contexts that I may take the approach with the coaching. If someone needs a different outcome from our work together, then it may be a different perspective or a different context, but it's still going to be, assessment, reflection, identification of changes needed, goal setting, timelines, and those kinds of things. And those can fit through different kinds of contexts in business. So if I'm doing my work with a nonprofit like a United Way or Red Cross, etc., or I'm working with a manufacturing company that's creating pieces or products to sell, it tends to be a different context or a different perspective that they're coming from, and so I can see some comparisons there to those four different contexts or perspectives, as you were saying.
So Dan says the Gospels were written by men at different stages in their lives. I can neither confirm or deny that.
That's a good.
So often when you see a depiction, whether it's what the most recent one, The Chosen, on whatever that app is, where it's there, or it's on YouTube, they all seem to be about the same age. Is that correct or not? I don't know. I have not studied it. I know that
that's a good point, though.
James and John, the brothers of thunder, sons of thunder.
Sons of Thunder. I like that.
Sons of Thunder. They talk about their father, and they're depicted as brothers. So that's a certain age. Now, if Dan is talking about that, the Gospels were written by, they may have been colleagues about the same age, but they wrote them at different times in their lives, just like we were talking about earlier with the different generations. The differences between Gen X and Gen Z is 20 years, 30 years.
Right.
But a lot of the things that they're going through, the experiences they have, I mean, when I talk to, no, I shouldn't out people. When I talk to younger people,
be careful now. Be careful
about new management positions that they have, and they tell me about the challenges they're having, and they're like, when are people going to grow up and stop being like that? And my response is never. It's you who needs to grow up and help them move along the way.
Right.
These are things that every generation goes through.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things too that I'm always pretty quick to point out, if someone references, like you said, well, they just need to grow up. I kind of hear that as, well, they just need to be like me, which they don't. Can they grow and get better in some ways? Sure. Can I get better and grow in some ways? Absolutely, for sure. But one of the things that I really feel good about, and I've found myself doing this probably because I spent 3 decades in higher ed, is I've been around 20-somethings most of my professional life. And so I've learned that I can learn from someone who's half my age, right?
Yeah.
And I welcome that. And so I would encourage those with gray hair or not much hair like me, that they would keep that in mind. Is like, I mean, I have friends, clients, former clients in their 20s that I will get on a call with them and say, hey, I want to pick your brain on something. And I want their input about what they think about what I'm thinking about, because I can get stuck in my 60-something year old head, but I can have a 25, 26, 27 go, no, man, that's cool. That's a great model, or that's a great idea. Or, ooh, you might want to test that before you go big guns with that. So if we have the humility to listen to people half our age, we can actually learn something. So that's kind of where my heart responds when somebody's like, hey, just need to grow up. And I'm like, it may not be growing up. It may be just, it's part of the learning journey. And I wasn't so bright when I was 25. I know that for a fact.
Well, and and Eric's plugging my book. Thank you, Eric. I'm about to
Love
plug
it,
it
man.
myself. There's a reason the subtitle of Proverbs
Mhm.
for Leadership is you
Mhm.
must understand yourself and improve if you
Yeah.
desire leadership that produces success in others.
Mhm.
My
Mhm.
book is all about, like you just said,
Mhm.
Jeff,
Mhm.
things that I did and went through when I was younger, anywhere
Mhm.
from how old am I? Anywhere from 30 years younger, okay, or more, to even just a few years ago. And what I, looking
Mhm.
back, learned from the experience of what I wish I would have done. And why did I
Mhm.
write it? So you don't have to go through it. So you
Yeah.
can have a sounding board. So you can have something to think about and how to
Thanks
handle
for
it.
saving us all that time, man. That is so helpful. But yeah, it is. I mean, I think back. Uh, hey, come on! I got a
He
little
has
bit up
way more
there.
hair than
Come
me.
on, Eric. I got a little
And
bit. I do
and,
have the
and Eric, you're
highbrow,
going to be
so it's
on in
okay.
8 episodes. So, shave it down.
I'm coming for you, man. Oh, I'm glad we can have fun while we're at it. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, you know, and I don't want, I am very faith focused, faith forward, and that is
Mhm.
by design,
Mhm.
especially since the book has been published, because I knew that I needed to take a stand. In June, you'll be seeing even more of a stand being taken, but we're not
Mhm.
going to talk about June yet. Come back in 2
Tune in
weeks for
next
that.
month. Yeah.
But people, regardless of, we've talked about generational differences, we've talked about personality differences,
Mhm.
we've talked about age differences. Let's talk for a minute about people of different faiths or people with no faith
Mhm.
all working
Mhm.
together in
Yeah.
a respectful way. And to me, a respectful way is not, well, you just don't talk about faith, because
Mhm.
you can talk about
Mhm.
woke, you can talk about BLM, you can talk
Mhm.
about LGBTQ, whatever else,
Mhm.
all the other
Mhm.
letters that there
Mhm.
are. And it's encouraged by
Mhm.
business to talk about that.
Mhm.
Some business, not all.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
Yet faith is not something that is
Yeah.
necessarily encouraged. Jeff, what
Mhm.
advice do you have? Because my
Mhm.
advice is just do it. Talk about your
Mhm.
faith. Let people know you're
Mhm.
a faith person, and also let them know that you're not perfect and you don't think you are, so you will make mistakes. But what advice do you have for when people are feeling like all these other things are being talked about, but faith isn't, and I want to engage? What
Mhm.
kind of
Yeah.
advice do you have for people?
Well, one of the things that has been helpful to me, at least, is whether it's a cohort where we're growing together, whether it's a one-on-one client, those kind of things, is that if we if we begin with what matters to them. If the
Mhm.
conversation starts with, "Hey, what are some core values?" The Converge U group that we do, that's the cohort learning thing. That day one, that was one of the things that I had them do in some of the reflection and dialogue was identify the things that are your core values. Identify the things that are the non-negotiables for you. And we talked about actions. What are the actions that show your core values?
Mhm.
And so in a mixed group with I didn't know what, just maybe all the above.
Right.
We started there, and people who quickly said, well, I'm not religious, or I'm not a faith, but these are really important things to me. And for me to hear that and think, those are wonderful. I want to be kind. I want to be respectful. I want to treat people fairly. So we had this conversation right out of the gate of things that the 12, 13 of us went, oh man, yeah, that's important stuff. I value that. Can I tell you about some of mine? Right. And so in that process of this 10, 12 of us dialoguing about what's your core values and where'd that come from? Or was that a response to a lack of, or was that something you learned growing up? And so that common ground was created, that we all have things that we feel strongly about that are truly valuable and important. And then it just gave us that environment to say, okay, we just talked about a bunch of different things from a bunch of different people, and we're all still friends and we're all still having a great
Yeah.
conversation. Let's keep this going.
Well, and truly, I mean, I love social media. Strong word. I'm engaged on social media.
Indeed.
I hang with people that are engaged on social media. A lot of people I know are engaged, and we help each other by liking and commenting because we enjoy doing that. But
I do too.
the one negative of social media, and if Eric's still watching, he knows where I'm going with this.
He's ready.
People think that they're invincible. They can say anything to anyone at any time.
Yeah.
To disagree and be rude. And whatever happened to, I don't agree with you. And let me tell you why. And having a real conversation. It is, I can tell you in all honesty, when I've gotten into a Facebook argument, okay, or a Facebook debate.
Those don't usually go well.
Anybody, one, it never goes well. Two, every time I have said to the person, hey, let's hop on a video, not like this, but just a video chat, look each other in the eye and have this conversation. They always say, no, I'd rather do it in public. And I've said, okay, I have a way to broadcast it. Would you like to do that? And people always say no. So here's the thing. I really think social media has made people feel invincible, like they can say anything and not agree to disagree or disagree with respect. Do you think that has happened?
Yeah, I think so in a lot of ways. The somewhat anonymity level of anonymity that people have or think they have is they're kind of standing behind. They're like Wilson. If you remember the show, Wilson is a guy you never saw. He was the neighbor in the backyard with his fence up to his, and you just saw his eyes. You never saw the full feet. I think we think we're. Yeah, home improvement. I think we pretend we're Wilson and we can say anything behind the fence and they don't know who it is. And so people have this false sense of, I think it's false sense of confidence because I think they think there's less accountability there. Whereas if I have to look at Sean and recognize him as a valuable human being that I'm having a conversation with, that takes away some of their so-called power. Because there's the reality of, hey, I'm looking at you, we're talking to each other. There's nobody to shut, like you said, hey, let's talk privately, one-on-one. There's not an audience. There's not a crowd to whip up. And I think sometimes that's what people want to avoid so they can kind of let it go and say what they think without a lot of accountability. And I'm not about that. I mean, I think healthy workplaces, healthy work teams can have hard conversations and still be respectful and graceful with each other, even when we're frustrated, maybe upset. But to say, you know what, I don't get that. I'm not sure why you feel that way, but let's still be friends.
Absolutely.
Wouldn't that be a wonderful world?
People need to be able to agree to disagree. I was at a active shooter training recently that the Louisville chapter of the International Facility Management Association, of which I'm a board member, we put on this active shooter training, 150 people there. It just so happened, we'd been planning it since December, and it just so happened that we ended up having the training like a week and 3 days after the active shooter incident in Louisville. So needless to say, attendance skyrocketed to this event. And what our speaker trainer talked about, one of the things he talked about was that people can go online and find their echo chamber. They can, regardless of how stupid, regardless of how hateful, regardless of how intelligent they are or their opinion is, they can find people who will agree with them and then surround themselves with those individuals. And I think we lost something because I remember, and I've talked about this on the show but before, my two grandfathers sitting at our dining room table. the Russian immigrant entrepreneur and the union organizer. Sitting down, having dinner, arguing, but leaving the table friends. And sometimes it got loud. Sometimes it got loud. But left the house friends, or at least tolerant of one another.
I mean, I guess I'm an optimist enough that I haven't given up that we can still do that. I know people, my friends, like coworkers that I have now, will disagree in a conference room and like, I disagree, or I don't think that's true, or why do you think that? We'll have those little ouchy conversations sometimes. But the bottom line, I was probably a month or two ago, we were wrapping up a day together, and I just looked at him and I said, I just want to tell you all that I really like you. Have a good week. And, and we all just kind of laugh, and because I do, they know that.
Yeah.
Then we had some fun with it, say, especially this one over here, who we like to tease. And that's important. I mean, when we have, if you going back to Gallup in strengths, that they've done years of research on employee engagement and all those kinds of things. And one of the keys they came up with, which it's one of those where you just kind of go, duh, yeah, isn't that obvious?
Right.
The engagement numbers, the employee retention, all those numbers were so much better if the person responded yes to this question. I have a best friend at work, or
wow.
I have at least one person at work who cares about me as a person. If they answered yes, I think it was that second one's even more critical. If there's just someone who gives a rip and thinks I matter outside of what I do for the business, I'm more inclined to stay. I'm more inclined to be engaged.
Right.
And that's so simple, and it should be so obvious that, what if our people know we care about them? If, heaven forbid, we go, I actually like you guys. We're more attached when we're connected, and we work better together.
How do you think greatness, and this will be my last question, how do you think greatness flourishes in what I see as our permanent hybrid work situation? I personally, and I work with people in facilities, I don't think we're ever going back to the office 100% of the time. I think once the boomers retire, they will be the last ones to go to the boomers, and the older Gen X's will be the last to go to the office every day of the week. It will be hybrid after that for everyone else. Do you agree? And if so, how do you think, what do we need to do for greatness to flourish?
Well, first of all, I think, COVID forced us to realize that we could do more in different places than we thought or realized. And I think that was really the seed that drove what is now an expectation by a majority of people that we can either work remote or hybrid. Certainly some industries that are, production, manufacturing, they're not going to have the means to do that.
People.
Yeah, those are going to be powerful and key and important. But yeah, I think it was it Musk or one of the bazillionaires that made a comment about the computer, the laptop generation was kind of poo-pooing the work from home or the hybrid. I think it's never going back. I mean, I've even talking to 20-somethings, 30-somethings who now are working remote. They've said to me, if my company ever makes me go back, I'll quit, give them my 2 weeks notice on the spot. They just won't do it. And so I think if companies force that, they're going to get that response from far too many people. And then, as you said, the hanging on millennials, and I don't mean that in a bad way, they're just hanging in there because they're in the finish years maybe of their career. If they're hanging in there working a few more years, and then maybe the Gen Xers that lean that way, they're going to progressively retire. And then those that are unwilling to do that they're going to struggle. I really think it's going to be a struggle. Now, the question being, how do you thrive in that? I think the the configuration of the teams, how they put teams together in terms of what does that look like if we're in 2 days a week and then we're remote 3 days a week? How do we stay connected? How do we engage each other? I think we've really got to look at those in terms of, again, what are the strengths I have on this team? What are the personality characteristics I have on this team? I mean, Sean, you know me, it was like, I was dying in COVID, right? I had to stay home and I couldn't get out and see people. I couldn't sit at a table with 3-4 of my friends and have coffee or have lunch. I was dying, right? So I am so happy that I can be out, but I don't spend the majority of my days at my office where we work together. And so it's just a mix. And I think people have realized they can get their work done. They can sometimes get more work done because they're not burnt out and stressed out and those kinds of things. And so, yeah, I agree with you. I don't think we're ever going to go back where there's not such a thing as a hybrid work assignment. I mean, look at the job postings that are out there and you're going to see hybrid or remote options in it, probably half of them, if not more. And so I think when you can be 100% remote dad or mom and you work from home and then a little comes along, that's my son and daughter-in-law have our 6-month grandchild, right? So they've been doing this tag team thing and figuring it out. And that would have been absolutely impossible without hybrid remote work options.
Absolutely. And I think it is, like we talked about earlier, the differences with boomers and Gen X needing to understand millennials and Gen Z and vice versa. That's going to be a big sticking point, and we're going to see the needle continue to move on that. It is never going back to full-time office. It's also never going back to stay at home, everybody. Hopefully.
I don't want it to. I mean,
but
yeah, I don't want it to.
In the center, fluctuating depending upon your role. Well, Dr. Jeff, thank you so much for being on my live stream podcast today. I truly appreciate it. For those of you that want to get in touch with Jeff, there's his email, there's his company website. I encourage you to reach out to him, have a conversation with him. You'll be glad you did. And don't forget that in just a few weeks, July is going to be here before you know it. There it is. I'm looking for the banner. Proverbs for Leadership, the video masterclass releasing in July. You're going to like it. This is going to be good. It's going to help you with the book. So that's it for now, everyone. Be happy, be well, be blessed in all you do. And I will see you next week.